welcome back to Latham's Premier Agronomy Center. I want to cover a topic that really starts back at planting, which is really when we have the most impact on yield potential, especially when it comes to corn. What I'm covering today is singulation and emergence, or non-uniform emergence, uniform emergence, whichever way you want to look at it, and which one really impacts yield the most. And hopefully this will help you kind of understand what happens to the plants out in the field and why we need to slow down sometimes in the spring and do some extra checking while we're getting the planter going every year. So to start off with singulation, I'm standing in front of our demo plots, the soybean demo plots, and this one, which has some corn standing in the soybeans here, represents different singulation rates. So on my right, or your left side of the screen, is a 1% or 99% singulation, good singulation. On my left, your right, shows 5% poor or 95% good singulation. So we don't always have a good visual representation of what that actually means when you're sitting in the tractor cab each year and it says, oh, 96% singulation. Oh, that's got to be good enough, right? Well, maybe it's not as good as what you really think it is. It's tough to really understand. So this plot kind of helps us get an idea what 1%, 5%, and so forth looks like as we're going through the field. So singulation essentially means how well it's dropping a seed. This has everything to do with the seed meter and how well you're caring for your planter. So you can have doubles, which essentially, or triples, which are plants on top of each other or seeds on top of each other. And then we can have skips. So we can have a blank spot in the row. We don't have that picket fence stand. And a lot of times we think, oh, picket fence stand, how important is that really? Well, that's what I want to talk about and get you to understand some of the. So what I want to talk about when it comes to singulation is the doubles and having skips in there. So when we have a skip or an empty spot in the row, you cause basically no population. So it doesn't look like there's nothing out there because obviously you have plants around it. But there's essentially in that spot where there should be a plant, in this case at 34,000 plants per acre, there is no plant. So you've lost your population there. When it comes to a double or a triple, seeds on top of each other, what happens is one plant in particular it typically beats it out of the ground and causes more stress or competition for that neighboring plant that it's on top of. So we can end up with things like this. I've got a couple to look at here. These two in particular are what we're talking about. So this would be the example of a double. So that particular plant that I had, it was right on top of the other plant right next to it. And you can see it's significantly smaller ear. This, I do have the yield estimates on that. Shows kind of a dramatic effect, but this smaller one is actually 183 in terms of if you planted if it was a stand of 34,000 compared to the ones next door, which were more uniform. This was, I'd say, the full potential with uniform spacing, picket fence stand, compared to the one that was next to this particular one. So we had a jump of, and you can see they're much bigger around as well as many more long. So it goes from 183 on the small end all the way up to 275 bushel per acre potential between these 3 years here. Now, this seems dramatic, and it is. It's to prove a point that this is impacting your yield. So if we look at it on a full scale per acre basis, we typically see just shy about 0.8 or just shy of 1 bushel per acre per percent. So I said on the right side here, that's 95% singulation. So that'd be about a 3 to 4 bushel an acre loss just having that many doubles and skips and issues in your stand out there in that particular field. So hopefully that puts it in a little bit perspective. Typically we see around a bushel or a little less per percent of singulation reduction. I'm going to set these down here just a second. So some of the things that we can do to help fix this. Number one, I mentioned, is be on top of checking your planter. Obviously the meters are paramount when it comes to this, making sure there's no issues depending what there's all kinds of planters out there from electronic to still chain drive or just about everything, hydraulic driven. So really it comes down to checking the seed meter, having it checked for you to make sure that there's no issues coming out of the gate as that meter spins and releases it down the seed tube. And then the seed tube is another thing. You got to make sure there's no issues with the seed tube as it gets down into the ground, and that if you're running Keaton seed firmers or something like that, that you're not dragging, you're closing that furrow, and it's not impeding how that seed drops out of that seed tube. So a lot of things to think about there. The other thing I'll say, if you have issues with singulation, the simplest thing you can do is slow down and see how it impacts your singulation, especially if you're using finger pickup and things like that. It always affects seed size and speed affect how it comes out of the planter, or out of that meter. So slowing down, seeing how that affects it, and really checking it as it comes out of the ground and things start to emerge. So the next part of this is the emergence part that I mentioned up front. So I've got a couple of plants here I want to talk about. But first, how we did this actually, our Precision Ag intern, Kirsten Sunken, staked several of these hybrids out in the field, and this one I picked, 5377, 103-day hybrid here. It's a semi-determinate ear that we'll look at. The flag test is the simplest way to do this, and that it simply involves, different colored flags, or if you have stakes or something that you can mark on which day each corn plant came out of the ground. So I typically do it for like a stand count size of row. You can do it in whatever size of row you want to, but just stake each plant in that particular flagged off area as it comes out of the ground. See if it comes out which ones come out the first day, second, third, and so on. So as we get further down the row, out to a week plus in terms of delayed emergence, that does significantly impact yield and how plants compete with each other. So I'm going to grab a couple of these plants that I've got here. I'm going to do my best to hold them up beside me here, but this particular hybrid, if you look in the book, has a really good emergence score, and that's what I want to tune you into too in terms of hybrid management, is making sure you understand that emergence rating. Now, I will preface this with saying that we have some nitrogen issues here. The nitrogen was not showing up in the field. We had plenty of it down, but just not in the right form. We had a drought, so I didn't choose the right form given how we had to get these plots started. So you'll notice the ear size is a little bit smaller than normal, but it still shows what I want to show here this morning. So these two plants here, you can see, have very similar sized ears. If I take this one out of the way here, these two plants emerged the same day. I think it was May 17th or something. They emerged the same day, have very similar sized ears. And if we average those two out, I believe, I had it wrote down here, one was 197 and one was 202. So just an average of about 200 bushel per acre between these two here. And the other thing, it's tough to see in these, but I also want to point out too, is stalk diameter. So when plants compete with each other unevenly, one comes out behind the other, obviously it impacts things like canopy structure and plant structure. Well, they're always going to want to try and get to that sunlight, so these are all about the same height if you'd look at them side by side, but the one that was delayed by 2 days has a significantly smaller stalk diameter too, which is not good when it gets later in the season. So we look at this ear here, and you can see that this one is significantly smaller. This one comes out to, I know, is a lot shorter and a lot less round. It's about 120 bushel per acre if you take this out to a 34,000 plant stand. So I'm just going to let these fall here. As you see the plants, they're about the same height, but like I mentioned, the diameter of the stalk is quite a bit different here, and you can see this one's also got a zippered ear as well. So it was significantly stressed compared to the others coming out even 2 days later. This particular hybrid all came out within about 3 days, which, like I mentioned, has a very good emergence score. The other one we had flagged, it took up to a week planting it. Early planting took about a week to emerge. So that week significantly slows it down. Typically, when we see delayed emergence of up to a week, we're going to see anywhere from 20 plus bushel per acre differences. And in this case, like I mentioned, that was closer to a 70 bushel difference, but like I mentioned, you got to think about this on a per acre scale and how it impacts each acre that you're growing corn on. So the number one thing to think about when it comes to uniform emergence, back to the planter, is planting depth We talk about this a lot, but the importance of planting depth and getting that crown established right, and obviously uneven planting depth is going to make it come out much more uneven for not good reasons. The other thing I also want to mention is residue management. In the last several years, I've seen this a lot, especially with more corn on corn. Managing that residue, keeping it out of the furrow, not hairpinning it, getting it in the furrow. Corn kernels do not imbibe water very well from residue, and many times I've been out in the field and seen this. If it's not seed to soil contact and it's seed to residue contact, those ones are going to struggle. They're going to imbibe the water very slowly and likely get diseased before they get out of the ground, especially in an early planting scenario. So if you've got all those factors compounding on top of each other, early planting, lots of residue, things like that, you need to make sure that you're managing that residue, whether it's with tillage in the fall and spring or row cleaners or strip till or something to help manage that residue so that we don't have as much seed to residue contact. The other thing I'd say is closing the furrow. This is a big one, especially in different conditions or no-till conditions. Making sure that you're closing that furrow and not getting air gaps in there. We've got so many different closing wheels, different systems on planters nowadays to help close the furrow in different conditions. So depending on what you're planting into and consistently planting into across your farm, pick the right one, the best one that really sets you up for success in getting that furrow closed, making sure that there's no air pockets. The last thing I'd say is knowing your hybrids. I talked about how 5377 is a semi-determinate, so it needs the ears out there. If we have skips in the row or we have uneven emergence, things like this, it's going to significantly impact the yield because it needs those plants out there per acre. It does not flex as well as some of the other hybrids that we have, which flex later in length and girth. This one's gonna take more of a hit from things like uneven emergence. So that's really important. And the last thing is just know when to stop. And we talk about this every spring, but know when to stop the planter when you're looking at conditions in the forecast that don't coincide with good emergence and imbibition, imbibitional chilling and things like that are caused by snow or cold rains, a couple days out. You got to remember that couple day window there that corn needs to start that germination process before you really hit it with really cold extreme temperatures. And then couple that with your hybrid choice. Look in our product guide and make sure that you're looking at that emergence score and organizing your seed shed so that you're planting the ones that emerge faster and better first and not the other way around. If you're planting the ones that don't emerge as well or have a lower emergence score first in early cold soils and tough conditions, then you're likely going to see a lot of those kind of scenarios play out in your field. So with that, hopefully that helps you a little bit when it comes to uniform emergence and singulation. The emergence is probably the biggest part of the equation, but really everything you do up front at the planter is extremely important. So make sure that you slow down, check more than just depth next year when you're planting, and take the time to get as right as you can as you're getting started.